Hello everyone. Today we will be covering the social and economic impacts of Schedule III drugs. Specifically, we will be covering codeine and testosterone. Schedule III drugs are approved for medical use by the FDA and are considered moderately addictive. Similar to Schedule II drugs, Schedule III drugs are also broken down into 3 and 3N. As a reminder, 3N, the N would stand for non-narcotic, as in not an opioid. To further explain this difference between 3 and 3N, let's take a look at some specific examples. Schedule III drugs include drugs such as Tylenol with codeine and Suboxone. Schedule 3N drugs include ketamine, anabolic steroids, and benzamphetamine. Another question that gets asked a lot is, what's the difference between codeine and oxycodone? And the short answer is, not a lot. If you look at the figures on the right, you can see that they have nearly identical chemical formulas. The only real difference being one nitric oxide group, which is that last little NO group. Oxycodone has another one. Another main difference between codeine and oxycodone is that codeine is a much less potent narcotic, and it's mainly used for treating coughs. So starting with Schedule III narcotics, let's take a closer look at codeine. Now, technically codeine itself is a Schedule II drug. However, it's a little strange because depending on its strength, its placement varies in the scheduling system. So like I said, codeine is Schedule II, but that's only when it's above 90 milligrams per gram. It's Schedule III when it's less than 90 milligrams per gram and infused with Tylenol. And it's also considered Schedule V when there's less than 20 milligrams per gram. Codeine is most commonly prescribed in forms where it is Schedule III, hence why I'm focusing on it as the main drug for Schedule III drugs. This varied spectrum of scheduling makes codeine extremely difficult to measure because of how common it is combined with other medications, so gauging the economic impact isn't so easy. On the other hand, the social impact of codeine is much more readily apparent. Codeine misuse was highest in ages 12 through 17, living in the Northeast U.S., and of poor physical health status. If we look at Graph 1, we can see that from 1996 to 2013, the total number of children who used codeine went down. It went from about 1.08 million to 1.03 million. In Graph 2 on the left, we can see that from 2001 to 2010, codeine prescriptions have decreased, while opiate prescriptions have increased. Lastly, if we look at Chart 3, we can see what percentage of codeine prescriptions come from where. We can see a very high majority come from emergency departments at 18%, and dentists, strangely enough, have a very high percentage with 14%. Additionally, almost 15% of codeine prescriptions come from unknown, which raises some questions as to how a lot of the codeine is getting out into the world. Here we have Graph 4, which essentially mimics kind of the information we saw in Graph 2. We can see that total opioids has gone up and down over time, but what that consists of hasn't been the same over time. In 1996, on the left of this chart, we can see that codeine was more or less the far and away leader in opioids being prescribed. And then as of 2013, while it is still number one, it's kind of trending towards decrease, whereas you have hydrocodone rising, and extrapolating some of the data, you could reason that it's going to supplant codeine soon. So since codeine is highly prescribed and misused by children, content analysis of social media gives us a unique look into the drug's social impact. If we look at this content analysis word cloud here, we can see that codeine has a large connection with hip-hop. There's specific rappers all over here like Young Lean, ASAP Mob, Lil Wayne. Odd Future is that amalgamation of letters you see there, and even Beyonce has a small little blurb there. There's also a high overlap with marijuana, wealth, and various other drugs like cannabis and THC, CBD, Adderall. The bottom line being here is that it's not a stretch to say that there's an emerging normalization of codeine misuse in popular culture. And even though it's not really pertinent, but they also did this with opiates too. And looking at some of the word cloud words here too, you can see that there's a popularity and overlap with other drugs, and it's not too far off from codeine. Needless to say, some of the same people that are abusing codeine are probably also abusing other type of opiates. To cover the other side of Schedule 3 drugs, let's take a closer look at some of the non-narcotic Schedule 3 drugs, specifically testosterone. As of 2011, total testosterone sales increased 12-fold globally, rising from 150 million in 2000 to 1.8 billion in 2011. Androgen use among men 40 years or older increased more than threefold, from 0.81% in 2001 to almost 3% in 2011. The true economic impact of testosterone, however, is very difficult to measure due to sales mainly being on the black market and or illegal trade. So even though there's not a great bearing over the economic impact of testosterone, there is a very strong social impact that testosterone has. Performance-enhancing drugs, or PEDs, which are a subset of steroids, have had a tremendous impact on culture through sports. Athletes such as cyclist Lance Armstrong in the top right, baseball players such as Barry Bonds in the bottom right, and Manny Ramirez, and track athletes such as Justin Gatlin and Marion Jones have all had run-ins with PEDs causing worldwide attention, even if you don't really know the sport. Dependence on anabolic steroids has heavy crossover with major depressive symptoms because of body positivity. Many people begin taking steroids to try to reach an ideal version of themselves that they see in the mirror, that they see in media, or that they see in others. In one study conducted, there were higher psychopathological symptoms that coincided with higher doses of testosterone. Basically, that meaning essentially the more mentally sick you were, the more likely you were to take a higher dosage of testosterone or steroids. So to summarize, compared to other industries, Schedule 3 and 3N is both difficult to measure and not as profitable. Codeine has had a tremendous social impact on children and teens due to its commonplace in the emergency department, illusion in popular music, and popularity as one of the lesser opioids. Testosterone has a much less pronounced social and economic impact, but stays relevant in our society through the global topics of performance-enhancing drugs and types of hormone replacement therapies.